Nice. Greg, I kind of want to get in this right away. I'm going to jump right in. Let's kind of talk about, you did quite a bit of time in the pen or lower level security places. So how'd you kind of get started in the drug world? Kind of tell us a little bit of the story, your background, how this all came about.
Yeah, like a lot of people, like yeah, like young guys, especially in the '70s. I started getting high, at a young age in my teenage years, and that led me basically into quitting going to school. I'd go surfing instead, ditch school, and started selling drugs like when I was 16 or so, and committing crimes around town, and just it basically morphed itself into I would go in between work, which I did with my family. My brother-in-law had some heavy equipment, and we did demolition and excavating. I'd work for a year, get tired of it, start selling drugs again, and then finally I moved to Colorado, got involved with my girlfriend's brother-in-law, and he started giving me jobs driving pot around the country from Florida out to LA back in the late '70s, '79, '80, and through him I met other people, and I met another guy that introduced me some guys and said, "Hey, we want you to start unloading our planes out in the desert." And we're flying pot up from Mexico and landed on dry lake beds out here in California. This was back in the '80s, and I had a pretty good run in my 20s, and lived in Palm Springs for 7 or so years between there and Colorado, and was having quite a bit of fun. And then 1988, I was living in Colorado and storing pot up there, and I got busted for my first federal case. This was for the first time I went to prison, and I got busted in Denver actually, but the case was out of Texas, and they charged me with buying marijuana, 2,400 pounds of pot down in Texas, and so that's where we had to go to court. It was that was really interesting. That was my first run-in really with the DEA, and I realized, you know, kind of, I don't know if they all are, but this one is a particular snake. This guy was out with me every night in topless bars, and we were paying the girls to come home with us. He was breaking out coke and that. And he was an agent, and so we hung out. Then we were taking delivery of this pot up in Colorado. He told me I had to buy a new pickup and a horse trailer. Had to give him all this money, which he later impounded and made his own. Because when he showed up to court, he's wearing my Rolex and that. It was just, I realized, he was basically living my life without the repercussions. That's what I felt like. And as you've been and you've dealt with, whatever kind of agents, and not some of them are okay and some of them aren't. And so they gave me I was supposed to get 10 to 12 years for over 1,000 kilos. And I was in court, and our lawyer said it was beginning of the new guidelines, Jack, which you're familiar with. And if there's any people out there, that's been in federal prison, they know all about the guidelines. And in 1988 is when 1987 is when the new guidelines started. So there wasn't any wiggle room. There was no plead. It was a weight thing. If you had this much weight, you got this much time. And mine was 10 to 12 years. Well, I was in court, and that agent was there, and I said, and he was with the U.S. attorney, and I said, "Hey, Mike, I know I'm going down." I said, "But I'm going to take you with me. I heard you're married." I said, "I'm going to make sure it gets out that you and me were doing coke and had hookers in our room for 2 days." And the U.S. attorney goes, "What's he talking about?" to the DEA agent, and all of a sudden they came back to us and they said, "Well, we're going to let you plead down to over 100 kilos," which, as you know, dropped our sentence in half. And
Yeah.
and the judge, I remember Judge Hinojosa, he came out and said, "I don't know what happened here, and I don't know why the U.S. attorney's dropping this plea." He goes, "I don't like it, but I'm going to let it happen." So that was my first. That was my first bid. They gave me my guidelines were 63 to 72 months, and 78 months. They gave me 72. They gave me the medium. And when I got busted, I had 3 passports on me in different names. I had just picked them up, and they were in my car. And plus, I was on probation from a drug case in California from years ago that I had left. I had split on, so I had a warrant basically. So they started me off in a higher security. All my co-defendants went to camp, which we'll be getting back to in further stories about camp, because that's where me and you met, was in a camp. But
Yeah.
they started me off in a place called FCI Phoenix, which was it was a 4.56. That's the way they used to do it. And then they had 5.6 maxes, which were pens. Now I've never been to the pen because I didn't have any violence or guns in my jacket. And so I started there, and I was there for like a year. Started at FCI Phoenix, and this is where. And then you know how when you get your security drop, where you were at Latuna, and when your security dropped, they said, well, where would you like to go? And that doesn't mean you get to go there, but you know, if you're cool with them, and you know, and they're cool with you, they'll usually try to help you out, try to get you close to your family, whatever. And so I said, well, I want to go to TI because I was from Southern California, and everybody in Southern California wants to go to TI. It's on the ocean. You can see yachts go by.
TI is what for everybody? TI stands for
Terminal Island.
Yeah.
Terminal Island. And if you're from LA, everybody tries to get to TI. And at the time when I asked to go, there was a moratorium on it because it was full. And so I'm getting, when I go to get on the airlift, they wouldn't tell me why. I don't know why, but I mean, because I'm going to be shackled and chained, but they wouldn't tell me. And they dropped me. I didn't drop to a camp level. I dropped to a low level. From a 4, I went to a 3. And anyways, so I get there and I go, well, I go, am I going to TI? And the guy goes, no, you're not going to TI. He goes, but you're going to like where you're going. You're going somewhere in Central California. Well, there was only one place in Central California, really. And, well, Lompoc's kind of Central California, but this is north. It's up by the Bay Area. I knew I was going to Pleasanton, which they called FCI Dublin now, which was just closed, as you know, because it wasn't all girls. But when I went, it was a co-ed prison. So I had when I walked in, I had been down about maybe a year and a half. And so I walk in, and you know, I had my khakis on. I had my travel khakis. I took the airlift there, and for any of you, you know, it's not like Con Air, but it sucks. You know, it's a jet. It's a passenger jet that the Marshal Service runs, and you know how it is. It's a horrible experience. And at the time, the transfer center wasn't even open yet in Oklahoma City. But so I've been down. I pull up in khakis, and they go, you got, you know, we went to R&D, and that's where they dress you out and that, as you know. And they said, okay, you guys can, chow hall's open, is almost closing, so we're going to get you in the chow hall. So they walked us in from R&D into the chow hall, and I go in there, and everybody's wearing street clothes, and there's women all over. And I'm going, oh man, this is great. And I go in there, and it was just kind of surreal, because you know, and this place actually looked like a college campus. It's now closed. It closed. We were the last group of guys to go. It closed in '91, but that was my second stop, and I didn't care if they let me out. I had money. I got a clothing package. I was dressed nice. I had a girlfriend in there. In fact, I've told you about her. She was in there for assassination on a federal judge, and Woody Harrelson's father was the hitman. His wife Pat was in there also. And Liz became my girlfriend. She fell in love with me. I was the first guy she was with in 9 years. She was serving a 30-year sentence. And she didn't even know. She thought it was drug money she was bringing. She brought 800 grand over to this guy and his wife, and her husband told her it was pot money. And it turns out it was money for this guy to kill a federal judge, because he was trying to judge. He couldn't get a break from him, and this judge was going to hook him up with like a CCE for 20 years. So anyways, that was my girlfriend in there, and that was just like, that was an amazing. The whole time I was in there, I kind of got high, lifted weights, played tennis, had a girlfriend, and so I left there. Then I got rid of a warrant, and they dropped my level again, and they dropped me down, and I went to Lompoc, which was a low FCI. It used to be a camp. There was a little camp outside that they were building, and I stayed there for 2 years. My last 90 days, I did camp. I don't know. Am I running on too long about my prison recap?
No. I mean, some of it. I mean, we'll go back at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe not in this episode, but talk to people so they understand some of how you got to here to there because of different levels and stuff. But I guess the point, you know, you're getting to this is people. Now, I guess I'll jump ahead a little bit. Was your first day? Now you went down what? 2 times,
6
3
years.
times?
3 times. This was my first. This was my first one. I did 63 months sentence. Yeah, on 72.
Okay. So was your first time a lot different than your last time as far as the way incarceration worked? Were things as wide open, or was
Well,
it?
you
I
know
remember
what?
the camps. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's kind of funny. Things that first bid, everything was better. The food was unreal. They would give you second. You know how bad the food was at Florence, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
way worse at La Tuna. It was like
Oh.
Victorville. The food was much worse than Florence. But my first bid, they used to give the federal government the same amount of money to feed an inmate that they gave him to feed a serviceman, a military. I
No.
don't know if it was $4 or $5 a day, something like I forget what it was, but I mean, it was all the milk you want. I mean, it was good food. And there was money for recreation. Everything was better, actually. Yeah. All right. So anyways, they sent us to a meeting and they started telling us all these rules with probation. And I said, hey, look, my mom and dad live over in Lake Havasu. It's more than 100 miles away. I haven't seen them for years. Can I go see them? And I mean, they go, no. I go, what? And they go, no. They go, it's over 100 miles. You're going to have to be out for a while and then ask your PO and he might let you go. And I go, well, that's not right. I said, I haven't seen them when I'm free in years. I had gotten a job working for the city of Santa Ana. And they go, well, you can't go see them. And I go, well, this isn't going to work for me. And I knew it wasn't going to anyways, and I kind of used that as an excuse. So the first day that I was supposed to start my probation, I was supposed to report to my federal probation officer. I took off, and I drove my car. I went to Tucson, went and saw my buddy Gordo, and he fronted me 200 pounds of weed. And I moved to Colorado and changed my name to Matt Brown was my first alias there, I remember. Anyways, so I'm there, and so I start slinging the weed around there, and then my buddy Kerry, who I went there to see, he goes, hey, I got some guys in New York, and that you might want to go out there. You get better prices. And I hadn't ever sold really back east, so I still had like 150 pounds. I took it back to New York, but I actually didn't go to New York. It was me and a couple guys I was with, and we took a minivan out there with U-Haul boxes in the back full of weed. And I said, look, the first beach we come to in Rhode Island, because I had customers in Boston lined up in New York, and I said we'll stop in Rhode Island. It's halfway in between, and we'll camp there. So we found a little beach town called Misquamicut, and I rented a house right on the sand there, and it was just like a little party town, college bars there, and I was having a good time. And so then I'm sitting there, and I was there for a while, and then I was coming back and forth to L.A. I met a new girlfriend, and she was like a little rich girl from Beverly Hills, and I don't know why I was taking her everywhere with me. And then when I moved, I came back to Rhode Island, and I was going to change residences, and I got a house over in Newport, well, a condo, and somebody kind of told on me, a guy who worked for me. And anyways, I got busted there. At the time, I had changed my name a few times during that time. I was living under a name of Jacob Matlin in Rhode Island. Well, I got busted for a little 62 pounds of weed, and so I go to court, and I'm thinking, well, when they run how they scan your prints on the
Oh yeah.
on the thing, I'm thinking, well, they're going to find out who I am, and they're going to find out the feds are looking for me, the marshals are looking for me for my probation violation, and I'm going to get gaffled up. Well, they didn't match them for some reason. So I'm sitting there, I'm going to court thinking they're going to give me bail, and I'm just going to split again, and, I'm going to pay bail, and I'm going to take off. Well, I go in front of the judge, and he goes, okay, Mr. Matlin, I'm like, you're from California. We don't like you people bringing your drugs out here and selling them, so I'm going to hold you without bail. And I talked to my lawyer, and I said, is there any? Nah, he goes, nah, he's not going to let you out. And I said, okay, Your Honor, since I'm not getting out, I want to wrap up I got something else I want to wrap up. I got a warrant out for a federal case from a prior marijuana conviction. And I go, and he goes, what? And I go, yeah, my real name's Greg Thompson. And I told him and everything. And I was in there under Jacob Matlin. Well, he goes, I'm going to have to reschedule you a hearing. So when I came back in, it was actually a funny thing. This judge, he's looking at me, and he started railing against me. He painted me out to be Billy the Kid and everything. He goes, you absconded on a marijuana case for 6,000 pounds. And And I go, Your Honor, and I raised my hand. He goes, what? And I go, it was only 2,400 pounds. And he was turning purple, I remember. And he goes, what's the difference? And the court stenographer started laughing at me. Well, it just, the story of that is they gave me 25 years for 60 pounds of base, 62 pounds, 60 pounds of pot. They gave me 25 years and 9 to serve on a marijuana case. The feds came back and picked me up, and I went back to Texas, and they gave me like 16 months and ran it concurrent. The judge said, look, what do you want, man? I said, well, I'd rather do my time on the feds. He goes, I can't. I'm going to run your time concurrent. He goes, let me just give you you'll be done before you come up for parole, so it won't affect you. I said, all right. So I come back, and there I went. That was my first time in state prison, and this was in Rhode Island. And I went in, and it was a noticeable difference from the feds about the food and stuff. But you could have TVs in your room if that means anything. Yeah, but it was all right. You know, they had weights there. I heard California, none of their prisons had weights. So Rhode Island had weights. I played a lot of handball, a lot of basketball, ran all the time. And I did 4.5 years there, and they gave me parole. Went back to California. And when I went back to California, I went to report for the California accepted me to watch me. And so I get back there and I report, and I said, hey, this is Greg Thompson. And she goes, well, I don't have any record of you. I said, well, I'm supposed to report here. They told me. And I go, well, check under Jacob Matlin. And so she checked under that. And I go, well, that's not my real name. I said, I can't get a license. I can't get another license under that name and everything. And she goes, well, you're going to have to do your parole under Jacob Matlin.
Jacob Matlin?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking, they know who I am, and so then the DMV wouldn't give me a license because they go, oh, you've had way too many driver's licenses. How'd you get all them licenses? And I said, oh, I can't remember. I was high on drugs, you know, because I had a DMV hookup I was buying licenses from. And so I got out on that, and then I got a violation. I got a violation in Rhode Island. I got arrested for drugs up in Sonoma. I walked into a house with my buddy, and I had a bunch of speed on me, and I didn't know that they were getting busted at the time. There was the cops were inside. They were just letting people come in, you know. And I had like an ounce or something, just something like in my pocket. And so I got that. So Rhode Island came and picked me up and had me do that violation. And then while I was in there in Rhode Island, I befriended a guy, and we became pretty good buddies, and he got me a job selling mortgages. When I got to the halfway house, I was waiting I had to do 6 months in the halfway house, then I could go home to California. I never made it home. And while I was there, he goes, man, hey, why don't you teach me how to make meth and how to get the chemicals and everything. And I knew I shouldn't have. I didn't feel good about it, but I did. And so I was showing him how to make the ephedrine out of the plant, and I got everything to do everything. And turns out his brother-in-law told on him, and he had a kid and stuff, so I kind of took all the responsibility for it, and they gave me 151 months. And that's when then that one I started off at a high level at Victorville, and I got to admit that when I came in the second time, it had been, I got out in 92, and I went back in 6 into federal, the federal prisons. And man, there was a stark difference by then, Jack. How much lower their budget was. You know, when I was in before, there was no like prison politics, even in the California. Well, not maybe in the pens there was, but not in the FCIs or the lows or the camps. And when I got back to I went to Victorville, and I was there 2 years. Like, there was California prison politics there, and that was my first experience with that. And although, I was almost 50, so I didn't have to soldier up or anything like that. I kind of knew everyone. You know how it is when you play a lot of sports. So anyways, and then, I did a couple years at Victorville, and in actuality, there was a lot of room. They had extra room there. So I got a single cell, and that's like golden.
Oh, that's gold.
That's golden, yeah. So I didn't want to go. And after a year, they asked me, they go, hey, your points went down. Do you want to go to a low? And I go, no, I'd rather stay here. Victorville was kind of wild, it was a lot of shit jumping off, but I was in a good thing. I had a lot of sports I played, and I had a single cell, and that changed everything. So I stayed there, and then a year later they go, hey, you gotta go. You're camp level. They go, but we can't run you from from a medium here down to a camp, you got to go to a low. Went to Safford for a year, and that's in Arizona, and they had weights there, tennis. It was cool. It was out in the desert. I was there, and then I did a year, and they go, okay, you got to go, and they asked me where I wanted to go, and I said Florence. Went to Florence, and I guess I was there. I don't know, what was I there? Probably about a year before you showed up, a year or two.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was a year before I got there. And the
Yeah.
reason I asked you about the old time feds being different, because I was always told, we heard back before I was even thought about going to prison that the federal thing is, it's a country club. And then when I got my bid and they gave me 15, and I ended up flying all over the country, and they sent me to Latuna. I remember my first time I found out about Latuna. I'm in Oklahoma City, where most people don't realize is the transfer center, and I'm going to Latuna FCI. I don't know anything about this place. There's an old black gentleman sitting in the day room talking to all the young guys. He'd been down for 31 years, and he was finally going to a camp. And these guys are asking about, oh, I'm going here. He goes, I ain't too bad there. And then hear another guy say, well, I'm going over here to this other place. Well, I ain't bad there at all and stuff. And I didn't say anything. At the end, everybody left. And he said, hey, man, you don't talk much. He says, where you headed? And I says, Latuna? He goes, damn, man, who the hell did you kill? And that was my first thing. And when I get to Latuna, I'm thinking this country club. We pulled in there. And they put us in this room, and we're sitting in this room, and the cockroaches are running in, and there's a scorpion, dead scorpion in the corner. And I said, man, I ain't never been to a country club like this shit before. So that's the reason I thought, boy, it changed a lot.
Well, you know what's funny, though? It's funny because when you bring that up, because now when I was in '88, Latuna had a reputation. They go, Latuna's the armpit, and that was 20 years, almost 20 years before. And Latuna was already old. What was it, an internment camp or a World War?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, is that what it was? Is that what it was? Now, Safford was a Japanese internment camp.
Yeah. The funny thing about Latuna, quick on that, we looked it up. A guy's family brought in this article about it, and then he snuck it in from the visit. Of course, he ain't supposed to bring nothing in, and it was about the people who ran the camps back then, complaining that Latuna was inhumane because they had 530 some in that little prison. And so we looked up that from the time that happened to the time that I arrived, there'd only been one little building built on, and that was out in the yard, and there was, I think it was 1,500 of us in there instead of 500.
3 times as many. And that was probably an administrative building they built, not another barracks.
Yeah. All it was, yeah. And so no one seemed to care about that. I thought, well, I didn't really care either. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. But yeah, it was. My brother had an article about it. He told me about it. I said, yeah. I said that place is a dump. I said, really? I said, and it was. It was a lot different. Than we got to Florence. For me, that was like, holy crap, this place is okay.
Florence was nice. That was sweet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like I said, that was easy time for me. But prison, a lot of people always ask me, and prison really wasn't that hard on me, and it wasn't that hard on you, because like you're like me, you like to read. Well, you write songs, you play guitar, you do a lot of other stuff. I like to lift weights. I like to play sports. You like to play sports. We're both runners, and so you could fill your day up really heavy, and then like I would be so tired. And my back would be so sore that I would just pass out at night. And I had a pretty full schedule. I had, about between running, lifting weights, playing handball, and reading, and so people always ask me, and I go, it never really bothered me that much, and I've got over 22 years in, so I was a little institutionalized when I got out this time. I still am, actually. It messed me up a little bit about, sometimes, I get tired of being around people and I want to be by myself and stuff. It messes with you. To me, I don't know about for you, the worst thing about prison is no privacy.
There's two things for me. There's a lack of any kind of privacy, and the fact I've got a big family. I had the 4 daughters and the grandkids. That was the actual prison part, being away from your family. I was very fortunate. They kept contact as best you can, so that was okay. As far as things to do, like you said, it's what you make of it, like anything else. And
right.
If you work out, and then the people find out later, we both had offices in a prison camp. And people always say, how did that happen? Well, we'll explain
with flat
that.
Screens. With flat screens. And the
with flat screens. And remote controls.
Nice chairs. and remote controls and nice chairs.
And do not disturb signs on the office
Yeah,
door. If
yeah.
Iowa football or basketball is playing, they had a do not disturb sign on the door so nobody could come in. And people think that's crazy. Now, Latuna wasn't like that, but Latuna wasn't as tough for me as it was a lot of people because I could use your head a little bit. It's like you do. Use your head, and you can get your way. You don't have to tell on people. Never told on anybody.
Yep.
But just find a way to make life better for everybody, the CEOs and everybody. Pretty soon, you know what? That you're going to get your way in some things. And it's hard to explain to people who haven't been there. Yeah,
Yeah.
truthfully, you can't. You really,
You can't, and
as
you
much
can't
as you
really,
try.
and but you're right. Like for you, it was harder because of your family. You had kids. I've never been married, never had kids, and even when I was out, I wasn't around my family. I was living back east. I've lived pretty much all over the country, transporting and selling, weed, kilos of coke. I lived in the Bahamas, Mexico, California. I lived all over, so I wasn't with my family. So that wasn't as big an issue for me as it would be for you. But the part with no privacy, that's why when I got a single cell there at Victorville, I said, hey, let me stay. And you're right, like I wasn't gangster in there or nothing, but if you don't have to tell on anybody. It's just like, and I hate seeing it. Just that shit drove me, seeing people who would tell for no reason. They weren't even trying to get out of trouble. They were just telling because they were haters. And
especially in the camp. The camp's full.
especially in the camp. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I wasn't used to that at all. When I got with Latuna to the camp, and that's the one thing that struck me. In fact, there's two guys from Latuna who were at the camp when I got there, and they met me at the bottom of the hill. And they told me there. He says, "Yeah," they says, "You're gonna like it here. It's real cool, but don't trust anybody. Unless they said unless they walk down from behind the fence, from Latuna or places you've been." He said the guys that came straight to camp. He said they tell on everybody for everything all the time.
Don't think anything about it.
Yeah, they didn't get it, but did not knowing someplace else they'd been body punched in the shower for about an hour for that stuff. But
got the blanket party going. Yeah.
But you got to remember, look at the guys you were with when you're, as we say, I always call it behind the fence. But compare those guys compared to the guys that you were with at Latuna. When I look at the guys I was with, in Latuna, at the camp rather. I misspoke, but when I was in Latuna, I was down at George Jung from the movie Blow. He and I were down there hanging out. Kent Jones, famous marijuana guy from up north that grew tons, and you had a couple guys, some bigger level.
Might not have heard what you just said. That George Young, that from Blow, that was Johnny Depp played him. In case people aren't referencing this, that he was in there with Jack for a long time.
Yeah, he was in there. We used to hang out there. And those are the kind of guys you meet in Latuna, and so you go from that and you get to the camp and you got a couple guys. One guy was a Secretary of State from the state of Mexico. And you got a bunch of white collar, a couple doctors, lawyers, some accountants, and
Skilling,
Jeff Skilling. Yeah, he left just Enron. He left just before I got there. So it's a whole different group of people, and they're not used to that type of thing. So that's why you have the changes and stuff. So, but one thing I thought that the camp was different to me in one way because when I was down at Latuna, the stuff you did down there was your day-to-day life. You weren't thinking about future, getting out, doing anything.
Nope.
This was it. That was it.
You're just thinking about getting by. You're just thinking about getting by and paying attention. And there's dangerous people like at Victorville.
Oh yeah.
You got to pay attention. You got to pay attention. Make sure you don't disrespect people. Because people get disrespected easy.
Yeah.
And if they get in their feelings, they might stick you.
Well, they will. It happens. So we had a guy get beat with a softball bat out in the yard. You don't know those things can happen. And most of the guys there aren't going to tell if it happens to you.
Do you remember when the short black guy was trying to beat the big nice really nice black guy? He came into education a lot, and I forget the older one. He was trying to beat him with a baseball bat out there at Pleasanton. At Florence, out on the baseball field, and he took the bat from him. I think he didn't really get hurt, and that was the guy that he didn't really like. The bigger guy didn't really like getting involved in anything.
Nothing. Yeah.
But he wasn't really a criminal. He was a camper.
Yeah, he was a true camper.
Yeah, and people really, anybody watch, if you've been in and you've been through systems, even in the state joints, there's the minimums, and then there's the mediums and the maxes, and there's a difference, and it's different, no doubt, and you do when you get to camp, if everybody knows you worked your way down from behind the fence, and you did some time in there at legit places, you got more respect for that.
Oh wow, no question. Yeah.
It was just I always gave guys that came from behind the fence more respect, and they gave it to me. It was just a shared experience.
Yeah. But things there were different because that's what respect was a big thing behind the fence. And like I said, it was a day-to-day existence. So that's what you did. That's
Yeah,
all it was. That's what I
yeah,
saw it. Well, you weren't planning. I wasn't thinking about, boy, when I get out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that.
I
I'm
know.
thinking,
I was
oh,
thinking I just want to I want to work my way down,
yeah,
and get out of here and go and get it a lower security, because well, even though I stayed at Victorville, a lot of times like when you go to chow or you're going out to rec and they funnel you in through the metal detectors, a lot of times that's where shit would jump off. And so, anytime you're going down and they're funneling you down and you got to wait in line to go through the metal detector, you got to pay attention.
yeah.
And so there's always that extra little, you got to be on your toes kind of thing. Whereas once you get to camp, you can kind of run around with your head up your ass a little bit, and
Oh, yeah. People do.
unless you're just being a total idiot and screwing some people over, you're really not going to have issues in the camp.
No. But the one thing they do have in common is, I thought, the only thing probably, they got some crazy bastards. Both of them. They're just crazy. And we don't have to go through a lot of stories. We've got stories we can share later. Ones that you and I saw, ones that I saw in Latuna. I mean, real quick, out the story in Latuna where we had guys who had a mouse that was eating into their food in their locker, so they caught him. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted to teach him a lesson, so they shaved him and turned him loose. And that was they said, well, we don't want to give him, I wish he needs to learn his lesson. And we had he only shaved one side of him, so we had a half naked mouse run around the unit for a year. And the thing is,
He became
no
a
one noticed
mascot.
it.
He became a
Yeah, he
mascot.
did. He did, and no one noticed. No one
Yeah.
thought that was weird, which was even weirder. But we had him in the camp too, as you know. But the thing I was going to get to at the camp that made it different is when you're there, then you do kind of start looking ahead. When you say it's a fair statement, when you get out, what you're going to do. I mean, get some kind of a plan. Not everybody does,
No.
but that's. But you have groups of people that there's a lot of grandiose planners that don't do anything
Hey,
there.
I'm pouring me a beer here. I got
All right,
I got like 24 tap handles here to choose from.
there you go.
I wish you were here having one with me, to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Um. Anyways,
Okay. Let me.
let me comment on something you just said. It made me
All right.
think of something about. You said, make sure I'm. Okay, there we go.
There
You
you are.
said how some people make plans and some don't, and so especially when you get to camp, you got to start thinking about what you're going to do when you get out, because you're going to get out. That's one thing about, unless you're doing, anybody who's at a camp or usually an FCI, they're getting out someday.
Yep.
And so, anyways, my first two bids, excuse me, I always planned on selling drugs again. That was always, I knew I was going to. I would meet connections in there. Okay, people to buy from, people to sell to, whatever be the case. And so I was basically planning my next bid the whole time, and I wasn't planning on getting ahead legally. And this time, when I got arrested my third time, the first day I got arrested, I said, "That's it. I'm done now. That's it. I'm too old. I can't.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to get out till I was like 58." And it's funny, I was thinking of how I was going to make it legally, and then I met you, and we'll get into that later. But it's kind of weird how many people really are in there not making any plans whatsoever about what they're going to do when they get out, and that's just like the recipe for coming back.
Yeah, it is. Even you had like three groups of people. The one was they did nothing to plan anything when they get out. Then you had the second one that were just ridiculous in their plans, and just bizarre ideas they had. And then you had the ones who were actually serious. It sent to serious ones that really were planning for something. Really, the minority, it seems like. I thought, because no one's ever seemed to follow through on things. I'm not talking about going out and just getting a job. I'm talking about starting a business or doing something. I guess you call them more of a major scale. But most guys just nothing.
Well, even
Look at
the ones
we knew.
yeah, but they were actually planning on starting a business with us, and they ended up just going back to getting a job and taking the safe. But there's nothing wrong with that. Taking the sure
Nothing
thing.
wrong with that, but one of the things I thought kind of struck me about a lot of those people is most of us, well, I speak for me and a lot of the white collar guys, the drug guys too, we ended up in prison because the barriers of doing something legitimate and making it big were a little tougher than just doing this,
Yeah.
if I can get away with it. And so these guys that you and I were with, we started a pretty large group and we started talking about the business possibility and stuff. As soon as the barriers started coming up, they all started falling away. Some
Yeah.
lasted longer than others, but they did.
Yeah. Well, we've lasted longer than we should have, Jack. I've been
Oh
out
yeah,
9 years, and I'm still driving a truck,
yeah, that's true.
and but we'll cover that. We'll get all that when we get into we'll get into it's not going to be easy. Don't think it's going to be subject parts of
Yeah,
the subject. If you're coming out of prison thinking you're going to come just start a business and be successful right away, you can do it, but it's a journey. That's for sure.
yeah.